Well, we thank you, everyone. We thank you for being here with us today. Reverend Lori sends you all her love. She's in the other room and she's doing great. And the idea that kind of came to me during the week as to where we are, kind of this year, kind of unfolding. You know, each year we go in a cycle. We go around the sun one time. In January we go back to the basics. And kind of where I think we are now is an opportunity to look at what is this thing called a spiritual path. Is there any such thing called a spiritual path? And if so, are there stages that our consciousness follows, or stages through which our consciousness passes on our way to wherever the end is? What is this thing called the end of the path? Is there such a thing? You know, and I think we really need to look at that. We really need to kind of get our minds around that from time to time. We need to stop and look at that. So what are we doing? What are we really doing? You know, we come together for an hour on a Sunday morning. We do our prayer and our meditation and our treatment and our readings during the week. We go out into the world where the world is our place for spiritual practice. But what are we really trying to do? Are we trying to do anything? Or are we trying to do nothing? And we get confusing signals along the way, you know, doing perfect non-doing. Does that mean we shouldn't do anything? Or do we have to do something to get to the point where we're doing non-doing? It all gets to be kind of puzzling, kind of a paradox, kind of an unsolvable problem. And every once in a while we need to come in and kind of sort through that a little bit. Ask ourselves, where am I really going? Why am I going there? Where am I now? What is the purpose of this thing called spiritual growth? Is there a path? Is there more than one path? How do I find my path? How do I follow my path? How do I know if I'm making progress? So these are the kind of things that we're going to talk about today. But the real purpose, I guess, the real intention is, as we put in the opening treatment, is that I would hope that each one of us comes to realize that there is a knower within. And eventually we must learn to get in touch with that knower within. Eventually we must learn to do or to be whatever we need to do or to be in order to get in touch with that. And let that lead us. Let that lead us on the path that's right for us. And we need to take the action. We need to do the things that need to be done. We need to engage in the practice that is appropriate for our path. Now, in any kind of human endeavor, let's start there and then work our way to the spiritual. In any sort of human endeavor, we kind of start with the end in mind. Covey tells us that in the 7 Habits of highly successful people. You have to start with the end in mind. What are we going? Where are we going? What does it look like when we're done? You know, what does this look like when we're done? Do we have a clue as to what the end game is, what the end result might be? And then we start to look for ways to get from wherever we are. You know, so usually an assessment is well, where do we want to go and where are we now? And then the next part of it is well, how do I get from here to there? Is there a path that goes from here to there? And we can go and we can look at other people. You know, how have other people done this? Whatever it happens to be. You know, suppose, for example, you decide that you want to be a doctor, or you want to be an engineer, or you want to be a pilot. It doesn't matter what you decide, but you have this end in mind, you know, what this looks like when I'm done. You look at where you are now, and then you look at, well, what have other people done? What are the paths that are available to me, you know? I can go to school full time. Maybe I can go to school at night and work during the day. Maybe I can move from where I am to another place where the training facilities or the schools are better, those sorts of things. You know, even something simple, even like going down to the park where they have the trail set out, you know. And when you get there, they have the sign, you know, and it's got a map on it, and it tells you exactly where you are. You know the things I'm talking about? You are here, the little arrow, you are here. You have this little sign, you are here. And then they have this map, and it shows you where the trail goes. Now, the trail might go off in several different directions from the trailhead. You know, there might be a destination. You might be going up to the peak of a mountain, in which case you have to come back somehow, some way. Or it might just be a big loop. It might just be a big loop that comes right back to where you are. And you find that your destination is your origin. But there's something that happens to you along the trail that is good for you. You're getting your exercise. You are growing. You are being in nature. You're aware of the sounds. You're aware of the animals. You're aware of the colors. You are aware of being alive. And then hopefully when you get back to where you started, you're in what appears to be physically the same spot, but you are not the same person. You have grown somehow. You have had a different experience. You have shifted your consciousness. Now, also in any human endeavor, in anything that we are trying to learn, particularly a skill that we're trying to learn, there's two parts to the process. There's kind of like bookends. There is the theoretical knowledge. There's the learning. There's the books that we read. There's the videos that we watch. There's the things that we need to know, and then we have to go practice. We have to actually go do something with that. So a simple example that many of us will be familiar with is learning to drive a car. You know, when I learned, we had to take driver's ed, and we would spend hours in the classroom, and they would tell us all kinds of things that you never needed to know about how a car worked. I think they just were trying to look for things to keep us out of trouble. You know, how an engine works, how an exhaust system works. Those are nice to know, but you don't really need to know that to drive a car. But you start to get some information, you know, that there's a procedure. There are certain steps that you need to take. You need to get in the car, and you need to adjust your seat for clear vision. You need to adjust your mirrors so that you can see what's behind you. You need to know where the controls are in the car. You need to know how to start the car. Things that you need to do first, and you have to do first things first. Very important. If you get in the car and try to put it in drive before you start it, it won't work. It won't go. Today, the gear shift lever won't even move, you know. Because I learned to drive on a stick, so you could put it in any gear you wanted before you started. But now you have to do the first things first. And when learning a skill, things kind of go in a sequence. You have to do the first things first. If you try to do the second thing first, it doesn't work. You may create the illusion that you're making progress, but you're not really making progress. Now, some people don't want to read the books. They don't want to do the theory. They don't want to get the book learning or the knowledge. They would just rather go out, and they would rather jump in and start doing something. And that's okay. That is a learning style. That is the way that some people learn. They have to start by doing. Other people have to start by getting the context and the bigger picture. But eventually the two have to come together. What you'll find is that particularly, like, for example, in a sport, if you take a sport like golf or tennis, a skill like that, there are people who go out and they'll just get a club, and they'll go to the range, they'll get a bucket of balls, and they'll just start hitting balls until they can get the balls to go pretty much where they want them to go. And then they'll get a bag of clubs, and they'll go out and they'll play around the golf. And they may get pretty good. They may be satisfied. They may get satisfied with their progress, you know. May join a league and get a handicap and go out once a week and play 9 holes of golf and hang out with their friends. And that's all they want, and they're happy with that. And that's okay. That's okay if that's what they want. But they'll reach a point eventually where they're not going to get any better. They're not going to get any better because what has happened is, along the way, some bad habits, for lack of a better way to describe them, some inappropriate techniques have crept into their practice. Maybe they're not holding the club exactly right. Maybe they're not standing in exactly the right position. Maybe there's something in their swing that they've got a little hitch and all those kind of things. And if they want to progress any further, then you're going to have to go to a coach. They're going to have to go back to someone who is going to help them to learn the things that they didn't learn when they went out to teach themselves. So at that point, the knowledge has to come back in. The knowledge is, well, you need to hold your hands a certain way, because if you don't, what's going to happen is the club head will be rotated a little bit during your swing and you're going to hook or slice the ball. Things like that. So we can be self-taught up to a point. And then at some point, we have to go back and incorporate the knowledge. The flip side of that is there's people who just love to read. They love to read and they love to watch videotapes and they love to see others do it. But they never go out and practice. They never go to the range. They never hit a ball. You can imagine trying to learn how to drive a car and never getting behind the wheel. The practice is necessary, because without the practice, all of the knowledge is just theoretical. Just theoretical. And as I said, there are certain things that you have to learn in a proper sequence. Okay? So, for example, switching back to driving a car again, you know, one of the simplest things that you do when you're trying to teach somebody to drive a car is just have them put it in gear and start out and go straight and then stop. That's it. That's all you need to learn today. Just learn how to start out, go straight, and stop. Don't worry about anything else. And why do you need to learn that first? Well, if you can't start and stop, anything else you try to do is going to be a disaster, right? If you can't start, you're not going to be able to do anything else. And if you can't stop, anything else that you do is going to not end well, you know. So you have to learn that. You have to learn in that sequence. Oh, so now I know how to start, and now I know how to stop. And now I know how to start, and now I know how to stop. When I went for the course, the basic rider's course for the motorcycle training, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, one of the things that they had us do was to straddle the motorcycle and push it with your feet. Don't even turn the engine on, just push it with your feet. They called it a duck walk. And you would just walk and push the motorcycle with your feet, and then when the instructor yelled stop, you would have to squeeze on the handbrake and bring the bike to a stop. And it was an important skill to learn, even at low speeds. And one of the reasons is that with a motorcycle, if you try to stop the front wheel while it's turned one way or the other, the bike will fall right over. Boom. It's just like a rock, it just goes over. And they're giving us the basic skills of making sure that your front wheel is straight ahead when you bring that bike to a stop. After that, now let's try it with a little bit of power. Let's start the engine. Let's learn how to operate the clutch, but go forward and stop. Go forward and stop. In another realm, learning how to play a musical instrument is another example. So you have to learn the musical theory, you have to learn how to read notes and things like that, but then you have to physically practice your instrument, and it's going to be different for every instrument that you play. If you're learning how to play a piano, you have to learn how to coordinate the left hand and the right hand. You have to learn where the notes are on the keyboard, so when you're looking at the sheet music, you know exactly which key that represents, which key on the piano to depress. If you're playing a guitar, you have to learn how to count the frets. You have to learn where to put your fingers on the frets. And again, you're looking at the music, but you're transposing that to which finger, what string, what fret am I going to put that on? And you have to practice. And a lot of practice when we were learning how to play music is designed to force us to do the things that are going to develop the technique we need to change from one note to the other quickly, to find those notes quickly. So, so we spend a lot of time doing drills, you know, doing drills where the melody doesn't really make much sense, but the sequence of the melody is designed to deliberately cause us to do something that we need to do, to build up that muscle memory, to do the things that we need to do in order to be successful in playing our music. If we don't do that, if we don't do the drills, which sometimes seem boring and they seem silly, and I would much rather just pick up my instrument and start playing, you know, like like my favorite star, I just want to do that. And of course now they're making instruments that more or less do that. You download the music and put it on a chip and put it in your keyboard and it plays. Because people don't want to put in the time. They don't want to put in the practice. They want to be in the performance, but not really learn how to play the instrument. But if we are to be successful playing the instrument, if we are truly to be successful, we have to put that time in there, because what will happen if we don't is otherwise we will go and we will try to move forward and we find we don't have the necessary skills. We haven't developed the necessary skills to move further. And now we're stuck. Right? And that's another important point when we're talking about a skill-based practice, is that if we don't practice enough, then we find that when we go to perform, when we go to play the game of golf or drive the car or fly the plane or play the instrument, we're not as good as we used to be. What happens with a skill is if you don't use it, you lose it. So we may practice and we may practice and we may develop proficiency, and then we stop practicing. And then we go back and we try to do it again, and now we're frustrated. I know I can do this better than that. I know I can hit the ball straighter than that. I know I can fly the plane better than this. I know that I can play this instrument better than I'm playing. See? So not only do we need the practice, but we need a consistent practice. So we need to combine our theory with our practice, and our practice with our theory. And if we try to do one but not the other, we get stuck, whichever one. If we try to only do the practice, or if we try to only do the theoretical knowledge. So that is kind of some general information about the way we as human beings, when we're trying to do something, you know, the way that we look at it, or one way that we can look at it. What is the end that I'm trying to achieve? What are the paths that will get me from where I am? Which means that we have to make some kind of an assessment about where I am. What are the paths, or what is a path, or what are the paths that'll get me from where I am to where I want to go? And then I have to choose one. But not only do I have to choose it, I have to dedicate myself to it. I have to commit myself to it. I have to read the theory, I have to do the practice. As I do the practice, I have to contemplate the theory. Is that what I read in the book? Is that what I thought when I read the book? Is that the way I understood it? Or do I understand it differently now that I'm engaged in the practice? Oh, maybe there's another way of interpreting what I read in the book. I see. So there's a synergy. Right? There's kind of go back and forth. One feeds off the other. There's a feedback loop that goes back and forth. And then we come to our spiritual life. We come to our spiritual goals, if you want to call them that. Should we even have spiritual goals? What are we talking about when we talk about spiritual growth? And I think this is kind of most important. We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we doing with our spiritual life? Why are we doing it? What is the purpose of doing it? Now, sometimes, you know, some of the religions that I've participated in growing up, and some of the religions that I've studied about, the end is kind of nebulous. The end is kind of vague. The end is something that happens after you die. You're going to go to this place called heaven and live happily ever after, kind of thing. And we won't worry about that today. We won't worry about that too much today. But the important thing is to do what you need to do today in order to get there. And religions at that level are very much focused on behavior, very much focused on dogma and creed and observing the rules and regulations and behaving in a manner that, according to the people who teach you that particular religion, whichever one it happens to be, at that first level that I keep talking about, which is the Orthodox level, is adhere to the dogma. Adhere to the dogma. That becomes the purpose. The end is not so much something to think about or talk about. It's not even something that can be intellectually known. So don't think about it, don't talk about it. Adhere to the dogma, because if you don't adhere to the dogma, you're not going to get there. So in that way of thinking, then, behaving in a manner that is in accordance with the dogma or creed of that particular belief system, that becomes the focus. That becomes what everybody focuses on. And that's what you see in the world today around you. People are focused on behavior. William James, when he wrote his book, The Varieties of Religious Experiences, actually he gave a series of lectures that were transcribed into books. This was in the late 1890s in Edinburgh, Scotland. And he said there's pretty much two basic orientations, religious orientations towards the world. There's the pessimist, and then there's the optimist, and he considered himself to be an optimist. He says the pessimists are kind of afraid of life itself, their relationship with the Creator. Everybody's judged, everybody's being punished, everybody's going to hell, kind of stuff. But the good news is that there's a way out. If you adhere to the particular religion, there's a way out. If you do the things that the religious leaders tell you to do, you won't suffer all of those dire consequences that the rest of humanity will. And he says then there's the healthy-minded optimist, and the healthy-minded optimist, they don't have all of the fear of life is bad, we can't trust it, people are going to be punished, sin and all those kind of things. They kind of think life is pretty good and it could be better, And they come to a point where they realize that they are conscious co-creators of life, that pretty much life is done unto them according to their belief, and if they would change their beliefs, life could be better. So William James starts out with these two opposing views, or opposing points of view of reality. And he says now they both have some sort of a brief awakening. So on the one hand, the Orthodox or fundamentalists might say, well, we're saved. We're okay because we adhere to this religion. We're going to be okay. We're going to go to heaven. And then the other one says, well, heaven can be right here, right now. It's a matter of consciousness, a matter of accepting it, a matter of spiritual growth. And what James tells us is that from that point on, if you look at the majority of the people, which camp they're in doesn't matter. He says from that point on, nothing significantly different happens in their lives. In other words, if you look at people before and after he calls it a conversion experience, nothing significantly different happens in their lives. They just simply feel better. They simply feel better about life. And we have to ask ourselves, do we just want to feel better about life? Is that why we participate in our religious path, our spiritual growth? Or is there more to that? So this is kind of, all of that is just by way of setup. Because now we have to ask ourselves, well, wait, is there more? It's kind of like the infomercials on TV. Don't call yet, there's more. For another $5, you'll get a second one free. Yeah. Just pay the postage and handling. There's more, but wait. So, if we look, then the question is what is the end? What is the end of spiritual growth? What is the end path as far as we know? What are the different ways to get there, and what are the stages of unfoldment? And if we look towards the east, if we look then back towards the east, Dr. Holmes tells us that some of the finest religious thought that we'll find comes to us from the east. I mean, in the West, our scientists have been thinking about the material. That's pretty much been our focus: what you can weigh, what you can measure, what you can touch. You know, as a matter of fact, at one point, scientists were arguing that thought experiments were invalid because they weren't real. They only took place in your head. You know, a thought experiment was one famous one is Einstein's thought experiment, by which he says he discovered relativity. Was he imagined what it would be like if he could sit on the end of a beam of light coming out of a flashlight. When somebody switched on that flashlight and that beam of light started moving away from the flashlight at the speed of light, if he could be with that, he could sit on the end of that beam and he could be projected through time and space in the same way the light is, what would it look like? See? That's a thought experiment. But some of our scientists say, you know, you can't even rely on thought experiments because they take place in your head. See? And you can't weigh and you can't measure and you can't touch and you can't feel what's in your head. Science needs to focus on the material things that can be weighed and measured and touched. But in the East, they've been more focused for thousands of years on the internal, what goes on inside. What is this thing called thought? Rather than just saying we can't even trust thought because we don't know what it is, they might say, well, what is this thing called thought? And what is this thing called mind? And what is this thing called spirit? And what is spiritual growth? Now, in both camps, in the East and the West, if we look at what is the end point, what is the end point of spiritual growth, it is the mystical union. It is the experience of oneness. So in the West, we might go through the stage where dogma and creed and the orthodox and behavior are the important things, and then we move into what is more what I would call a Gnostic stage, which is about knowing. It's not just about doing, it's about knowing. And it's not just about practicing behavior, it's about knowing. And so Emmett Fox tells us down at level 1, you know, God came down from heaven and met Moses on the mountain, and the earth shook and there was smoke and there was all this kind of big dramatic scene, and God says, tell them not to steal each other's shoes. Well, for people who need to be told not to steal each other's shoes, that's a fast rule, thou shalt not steal. But when you get into the next level, you say, really? Is there more to it than that? Is that all there is? I mean, people have known not to steal each other's shoes long before Moses came along. Why did God come down from heaven? And this is a metaphor, of course. Why did the earth shake? Why did the bush burn, but it was not consumed? What does that mean? See, we start to look for the kind of the esoteric meanings, the hidden meanings. We start to really grow. See, we start to really explore. We start to really get into it. And then we move into the mystical level, which is the mystical level of just being one with it. Just being one with it. That is the I and the Father are one experience. The I amness, the suchness. As Dr. Holmes tells us, we just want to be at home with the beloved. In the East, they might call that enlightenment. Enlightenment. We have completely moved beyond our perceptions, our thoughts, our beliefs, our prejudices, the reality that we think is real. And we have moved into a different experience. So this is important. We have to understand then that what we experience, what you and I experience in the world, is our perceptions. It's not the world as it is. It's the world as we believe it is. It's the world as we see it to be. Two people can look at the same event and come away with two entirely different understandings of what that event meant. Why that was important or why it wasn't important. None of us is capable of taking in all of the information that is available to us right now. There's information available to us that our senses can't even pick up. But there's a lot of information that we can pick up and we don't see. We don't see because what we see is what we expect to see. So what we come to understand, and where I'm going with this for homework, I'm going to give you a homework assignment this week, and I'll have to send Kathy an email to check on everybody, make sure you're doing your homework, is I'd like you to sometime during the week, I want you to Google the ox herding pictures. There's 10 ox herding pictures that come to us from Zen Buddhism. And these are the path, the stages of unfoldment on the path to enlightenment as described in Zen Buddhism. Now this is just one way. There are other ways to describe it, but this is one way, and it's a good way for us. Good way for us to start if we haven't done this. So the end of the path is this thing called enlightenment, or this thing in the West that we would call the mystical union. This point where self and other is gone. This point where we actually experience a sense of unity with the divine within us, the divine within each and every person, the divine within all things. This is what the mystics and the saints tell us about. This is the ineffable cosmic consciousness that Richard Maurice Buck wrote about in his book. This is the mystical experience. This is Moses sitting in the presence of the bush where the fire burns but doesn't consume. That fire is the fire of meditation, the fire of the experience of oneness. Moses was with the presence of God on the mountain. Mystical experience. Paul was knocked off his horse and blinded by the light. Mystical experience. Mystical experience. The Buddha sat under the tree and reached enlightenment. We're all trying to say kind of similar things. So the very first, the 10 ox herding pictures are a sequence that represent the stages of growth on our spiritual path. And the very first one is the sense of uneasiness, the sense of, gee, there's more. You know, I've been doing all the things that I'm supposed to do. You might think, like in the New Testament, there's a parable there where the rich young man comes to see Jesus, and he says, you know, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do. I tithe, I give money to the temple, I give money to the poor, I observe the holy days, I go to church when I'm supposed to, go to temple when I'm supposed to go to temple. I do all the things that I'm supposed to do, you know. What more is there? And it's that feeling of what more is there that is really a starting point. It is really a starting point of our growth, because that gets us to go looking, there is something else. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why are we looking for something else? Is there something within us that is telling us that there's something else, that's calling us to something else? Is it, as Meister Eckhart says, is the love of God within us clearing its throat, saying, there's more, there's more. So we go through life and we get engaged in the things of life. We go to school and we go to work and we have families and we have jobs and we have all of those things. And at some point, you know, it's like Peggy Lee, who, by the way, Ernest Holmes and Peggy Lee were friends. Peggy Lee sang this song, is that all there is, my friend? If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze. Let's have a ball. Is that all there is? And there's something within us that says, yes. Yes, there is. There is. And it's already here, see. It's already present. It's omnipresence. But we don't see it because there's something in the way that's preventing us from seeing it. We don't experience it because there's something in the way that is preventing us from experiencing it. And that thing that is in the way is our consciousness, is our mind, if you want to call it that. It is our ego. This is the bull. This is the bull that in the ox herding pictures, the bull being the ox. This is the bull that we need to capture, and we need to bring in line. We need to find a way to do this. And this then is what the unfoldment of the spiritual practice is about. We become aware of it perhaps through theoretical knowledge, perhaps through hearing of other people, perhaps listening to a talk, perhaps reading a book. We become aware of the fact that there's another reality. You know, in the New Testament again, it says, don't judge by appearances, but judge by the righteous judgment. What is this righteous judgment that we're talking about? There's this whole other way of experiencing life. So we hear that, and it's good to hear that, and it's good to listen to people talk about it, and it's good to hear other people tell us of their experiences of it. But we want to know, how can I have some of that? How can I get some of that? I want some of that. And this is where the practice comes in. So for many people, what happens is we become aware of the other possibilities. We become aware that other people say that they have had experiences. We become aware that other people say that they have found practices that lead them from where they are to where they want to go. And we stop right there. We stop. We're kind of like what William James says. We're just satisfied to know that there's something else, and we feel better about that. And at that point, we have to ask ourselves, is that all we want? Is that all we want, is to feel better? Is that all we want, is to know that other people have had the experience? Or are we ready to step on that path in earnest? So there comes a time in each and every one of our lives, whether it's today or tomorrow, or whether it was last month or last year, or whether it's some point in the future, there comes a day when we have to really step on the path, where we have to really do the practice. We have to get in the car and drive. We have to go out to the range and get a bucket of balls. We have to do the spiritual practice. If we cannot see things as they are, because we are stuck in our opinion of the way they ought to be, right? We're stuck in our own perception of the world, then the practice that we're looking for is a practice that will help us to get beyond mind, to get beyond consciousness, to get beyond the chatter in our head that is telling us constantly whether this is this way or that way, or good or bad or the other thing, judging and analyzing and weighing and driving us crazy. And to find that still small place, right? Be still and know. Be still and know. It is everything we need to know right there. Be still and know. But how do I be still and know? How can I get there? What do I need to do to get there? You know. Remember one time in Durham we had a class. We had a class. I can't remember what it was on. And a lady came to us for the first time. She had never been with us before in any of our classes. And she said, you know, I'm really looking for something that works for me, because I've been meditating at 90 miles an hour and nothing is happening. And of course the minister chuckled and says, well, you know, you don't meditate at 90 miles an hour. You can't make it hard. You can't make it hard. And this is kind of, if you follow through the ox herding pictures, you know, we kind of get this glimpse, we kind of get this idea, and we start to do our practice. And the primary practice that they're talking about in Zen Buddhism is meditation. It is the sitting and counting from 1 through 5. We'll just start right there. Can I sit, inhale, count 1, exhale, inhale, count 2, exhale. Can I get to 5 without losing my thought? See, the bull wants to go, the consciousness wants to go, the mind wants to go, but what about this, but what about that, but what about the other thing? It wants to distract us. Can I bring myself back? Can I bring myself back gently? Can I develop the discipline to do my practice, number 1? And when I'm doing my practice, can I develop the discipline to bring my mind back to the fact that I'm breathing? Breath is occurring. That is it. Breath is occurring. So we start to do this. We start with something that seems innocuous, counting breaths, sitting for 20 minutes once or twice a day, counting breaths. You know, put a timer on your smartphone or download a meditation bell timer. Can we just sit and learn to be still? Learn to be still. Now what happens to us, I think, when we start to do this, we have all these expectations about what's going to happen. And none of those expectations ever come true. Can we just sit with whatever happens? Well, we count from 1 to 5 over and over and over again for 20 minutes. Can we just learn to be? Can we just learn to be still? And as we start to do that, we progress through the stages. As we start to do that, we get this glimpse of this other reality that I'm talking about. We get this glimpse of what it's like to just simply be. Right? We get this glimpse of the experience that the mystics have been telling us about. We just, it happens, you know. And we go, oh my goodness, what was that? What was that? See? I want more of that. I want more of that. And we start chasing after it. See? And once we start chasing after it, it's fooled us again. Our mind has fooled us again. You can't get it by chasing after it. You have to get it through your practice. You have to get it through your discipline. You have to get it through sitting and finding the meditation that works for you. Right? Now, I use counting breaths as an example. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there's 113 different techniques for meditation. Osho expanded on that in what was at one time called the Book of Wisdom. And it has a different title now. But if you search online, it's available in its entirety in PDF format, and you can download it. 113 different ways to meditate. You're bound to find one that you like. You're bound to find one that is easy for you. You're bound to find one of the 113 that you'll stick with. Now, the one that's the most difficult offers you the most growth. But you want to find one that's easy for you at the start so that you will stay with it. So we find the path that works for us. We find the knowledge and the information and the theoretical learning that appeals to us, that makes sense to us. We find the spiritual practice that goes with that. And then we start to measure our progress along that path. We look at those 10 ox herding pictures and we say, well, where am I here? On a scale of 1 to 10, where am I? And I can tell you, everybody asked that, they're going to tell you 8. 8. I haven't asked anybody that question and said, oh, I'm an 8, you know. Absolutely. I said, well, where's everybody else that, you know? Oh, there are 2. There are 2. Well, you're a 2 as well. 2s hang out with 2s. We have to be honest with ourselves. Where am I along the path? How dedicated am I to the path? And what happens is success begets success. So at first it may seem like, oh, this is a lot of time. This is a lot, you know, 20 minutes. 20 minutes once a day is a lot. 20 minutes twice a day is enormous. This is a lot of time, but success begets success. We have that glimpse. We have that aha. We have that little something that tells us, yes, you're right, there is something down this path. You've got to keep going down this path. There is something down here. You have to dedicate yourself to it. And then we want to dedicate ourselves to it more and more and more. So as the ox herding pictures go on, eventually the young shepherd boy who's chasing this mysterious ox that at first he only suspected might be there, and then later he saw the footprints, and then later he got a glimpse of it, and then he tried to wrestle it, he tried to get a bridle on it, and he tried to get control of it, and that's when we're trying to force our mind to do what we want it to do. And of course you can imagine what's happening if you try to wrestle a bull. But through practice, through consistency, eventually we have this young shepherd, this young ox herd, riding the bull home. He now has his mind doing what he wants it to do, rather than having the mind running around doing what it wants to do and having him follow. Right? I know I've told you this. Osho said, it's like our mind is a stray dog and we just follow it wherever it wanders. Eventually we learn to be present. Eventually we learn to have our consciousness follow our intention. And it doesn't stop there. The development doesn't stop there. That's only a phase. And it's not a phase that we should be egotistically proud of. Oh, look at me, look what I did. It's a phase of development. And then what happens is then we start the real growth. Then what happens is the sense of self and other starts to dissolve. Then what happens is we start to experience the unity, the oneness. And then like the trailhead that was a loop that comes back in a circle, we find ourselves back in the world, but not of the world. We find ourselves able to be in the market, but still be present with the divine. We find ourselves able to do our daily tasks without being pulled away from our experience of the divine. Sense of otherness is gone. The mystical union is there. The oneness, the I amness, the suchness. So I invite you this week, just Google the ox herding pictures. Read the poems. There's a poem that goes with each one. Read the commentary from the different websites that the different Zen Buddhist teachers have put out there. Now I recognize that we're not Zen Buddhists, but we can learn from everyone. Look at those stages of spiritual development. Look at those stages of spiritual growth. Ask yourself, where am I really? Where am I really? Do I have a good balance between my theoretical knowledge and study and my actual practice? If not, what do I need to do to find that balance? Do I need to practice more? Do I need to study more? Do I need to do both a little bit? If I don't have 20 minutes twice a day, can I give it 5 minutes twice a day? And then slowly increase that, maybe 6 to 10 to 15 to 20. Am I willing to stay with my practice until I get that glimpse, that the pictures, the pictographs are telling us about? First I only suspect it's there, then I get a hint, I see some footprints, but finally I see part of it. I see part of it moving off through the woods. Am I willing to stay with that? I think once we get to that point in our unfoldment along the spiritual path, then our ability to stay with our practice becomes easier and easier because we've had that taste of honey. We want more. We want more. There is something within us that is calling us home, and it's calling us each in the way that's appropriate for us. But we have to open ourselves up to guidance. We have to find the path that works for us, and then we have to follow it. Nobody else can do that for us. It won't do you a bit of good if I get on the path and run the loop for you and come back and listen. You feel great because your pulse was up to 127 the whole way around, and we ran the whole way around and really got our heart moving. You might say, well, Jim, that was good for you, but it didn't do a thing for me. And it's the same way with the spiritual growth. We have to get on the path. We have to do the practice. We have to be consistent with our practice, because if we're not consistent, we lose. We lose our skills as we go along. And we have to dedicate ourselves to following the path that's appropriate for us. So I invite you this week, please take a look at those 10 ox herding pictures that I mentioned. Please see what comes to you during the week as you look at them. Please observe what insights you get, what guidance you get. Look for meditation resources on the web. Do your treatment. Do your spiritual mind treatment to open yourself up to guidance and action. To dedicate yourself to your spiritual path. It is inevitable that we will all do this eventually. We just have to ask ourselves, is now the time? Do I know my way? Do I dedicate myself to my practice? And I think the answer is yes. Yes, this is what I want. This is what I do. This is who I am. And so it is. Let's come together then in a closing treatment. Let's recognize that the very love of God has created us out of itself and is waiting within us in quiet repose for us to awaken to its presence. It is inviting us to come and walk with it hand in hand in the cool of the evening on the path of spiritual growth that is appropriate for us. Our hearts are now awakened. We wish to be at home with the beloved. We are more than willing to let go of the delusions of ordinary mind that prevents us from seeing things as they truly are. We are committed to our practice. We are committed to our studies. We are committed to our growth. We are committed to discovering that that which we have been seeking has been seeking us. And it has been here all along, waiting for our return. We're grateful for the opportunity to know this truth and to release it to that law which makes it so, according to our belief. We release this treatment, so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is.